Morning, everyone. My name's Dan. This is The Price of Everything. Before I start, I just want to clear up a possible misconception this morning. I'm a bit worried that some of you might have come here expecting to see a proper play. This is actually a performance lecture. Oh, what's that, Dan? Well, a performance lecture compared to a proper play is obviously of far higher cultural value, but far less enjoyable. If anything, it's going to be quite hard work. You're going to have to listen quite carefully. There's lots of numbers involved, and some of you might have to do some counting. And also, just to add a little bit of pressure, there's a couple of cameras in this morning. I don't know if you've noticed them. So you really need to perform at your best as an audience this morning. You're going to have to work quite hard. We're streaming live to the internet. There's a potential global audience of anything up to 7 billion. So don't fuck it up. If that doesn't sound like your cup of tea, this will be a really good moment to just go and get a cup of tea. All right, suit yourselves. I'll make a start. This is a pint of milk. I bought it from the co-op in Stockbridge, the Scotmid, as it's called in these parts. Delicious, nutritious. It's good for your teeth and bones. And it cost 51p. It's pretty good value for money, I'm sure you'll agree. 51p for a pint of milk. 51p, and when you put your card in the pin machine in the co-op, it asks you a kind of market research question. Are people familiar with this? We've got a nodding head here, thank God. Otherwise, this will be bewildering as well as digressive. So, for those of you who've no idea what I'm talking about, I've started on this track now, so I'm going to finish. When you put your card in the pin machine in the co-op, it asks you a sort of yes or no market research question. Usually it's something to do with the store, like, do you think we stock enough bread? Yes or no. And sometimes it's more of a big picture kind of question, like, do you think we should sack the government? Yes or no. Show of hands? Anyway, when I bought this pint of milk, the reason I bring this up is because the question was very much in the latter category this morning. When I bought this pint of milk, the question on the co-op pin pad was, do you think the budget deficit is out of control? Yes or no? So I ticked no, even though I think the budget deficit probably is out of control, because I didn't want my answer on a co-op pin pad to be used to justify further huge budget cuts. Which actually was enormous megalomania on my part, wasn't it? Because there'll be further huge budget cuts regardless of my answer on a co-op pin pad. Anyway, where was I? Delicious, nutritious 50. Ah, yes, would you like some? Would you like a glass of milk? Oh, affirmative there. I'm not going to force you to drink milk, but I am going to pour you all a third of a pint of milk. And in case you're worried that I'm going to attempt some sort of loaves and fishes trick here, there is a bit more. Yeah, I've been shopping. Is anyone here lactose intolerant or vegan? Well, I think that's a relief for everyone. Although, just in case, I did... And I'm also aware that watching a man pour 45 glasses of milk is not necessarily the most scintillating theatrical spectacle. And so as a sort of sop to the idea of entertainment, I'm going to tell you about some research I've been doing recently while I pour. It's about the value of various constituent parts of the human body. Oh, and before anyone asks, yes, it is proper research. I found it on the internet. So, the human body contains traces of about a dozen elements. Silicon, zinc, manganese, magnesium, fluorine, aluminium, gold, silver, arsenic, and plenty more. And all of these elements, in the quantities in which they appear in your body, could be sold on the open market. Not necessarily a process you'd enjoy. It's not necessarily a process you'd survive. But nevertheless, if we could get at them, we could sell the elemental content of your body. What do you reckon we'd get? Have a guess. This is sort of filler while I pour some milk. We do have an hour. I'm not afraid to use it. Genuine fear in that laugh there. Have a guess. £1.50. Lower.
3p.
3p. It's a very conservative estimate there. You're worth more than that, sir. Higher. 56p. You're sort of homing in on this. I like your thinking. Wrong. That's very close. It's actually about 60p. But there are other things in the human body which could be sold. So, for example, the human skin. If priced at the same value as cowhide, could also be sold. Cowhide's about 17 pence a square foot. It's as good a metric as any. Again, have a guess.
With or without hair?
Well, I think you'd probably have to shave the hair, which possibly might add to the cost in purchase of razors and so on. But the hair is not part of the value. £150. If you're absolutely colossal. Maybe if you were a blue whale, you'd be in that sort of area. It's actually, I'll tell you, because we do only have an hour after all. It's actually about £2. All of which, these are sort of slightly disappointing figures given the amount of build-up. So let's get into some slightly more valuable things. A working heart would fetch £40,000. This is like sale of the century. A kidney, 54,800, and a lung, 69,740, and you've got two of those. A woman could make £134,000 by selling 8 years' worth of eggs. For a man to make the same, he'd have to make 20 donations a month for 20 years. Just think about that. Actually, don't think about that while I'm pouring you all a glass of milk. Because then we get into the really valuable stuff. All of your antibodies would fetch 4.4 million quid. Your DNA, 5.8 million quid. And the real biggie, the real bonanza, is your approximately 1,000 grams of bone marrow at round about £13,800 per gram would fetch 13.8 million quid. There's a bit of bonus jazz going on the slide projector there. A bit extra for your money this morning. Add up the lot, and each of your bodies, just bearing in mind the stuff we've already talked about this morning, would fetch 27 million quid. To give that figure a technical term, £27 million is slightly more than a Demi-Torres. Very limited reaction to the football joke there. Even though the season started yesterday. Thought I might pick it up a bit, never mind. So for the lay people among you, maybe I'd better express that statistic differently. So £27 million. If Lake Windermere were milk, £27 million would buy you approximately 9/17 of that lake. Or to give it another technical term, it's a fuck of a lot of milk. And all of this business about trying to put a price on various parts of my body, as if I would ever sell, really got me thinking, why do things cost what they cost? How do they acquire their market value? and I decided to try a few experiments in crowdsourcing the value of something that couldn't possibly be bought. Before I tell you about that, though, I want to spend a moment considering the value of what it is you're getting this morning. Not the milk, the show. Which I've already explained, of course, is a very high cultural value. Let's put a figure on that, shall we? So, the arts cost everyone in Britain about 17 pence a week. That's round about a third of a pint of milk in your tax give. They generate for the economy in VAT on ticket receipts, in tax on pizza restaurants that you never would have been in if you hadn't have gone to see Mamma Mia. They generate about 35 pence a week. You put in 17 pence, you get the arts and 35 pence. The arts are a terrific investment. What a great way of making money. It's a bit like if I were to keep your third of a pint of milk, do the whole show, and then give you all 2/3 of a pint of milk. A bit like a bank. I'll keep it cool and return it with interest. Like a bank, except that I'll return it with interest. You buy the arts from a shop called government. You gobble them all up in one go, and then you get to sell them on at a profit. What a phenomenal investment. But then I thought, before getting too excited about the value for money argument for, frankly, anything, I decided to try and consider something else in public policy that we tend to think of as a really good investment. The NHS costs us collectively £11 billion a year. Not just us, that means we need to include the people watching on the internet as well. That's about £3.50 per person per week, and that's the amount of milk I've got lined up here. And the NHS cures the sick. It makes people better. And, of course, most importantly, from the economic point of view, it returns people to work so that they can continue contributing productively to the economy. And that's the most important thing, isn't it? Except, hang on a minute. The better the NHS, the more people are cured. And the more people are cured, the longer people live. And the longer people live, the more they use the NHS. And the more they use the NHS, the more it costs us. The more money these people bleed out of our economy. And actually, these people using the NHS, they're not going to contribute productively to the economy at all, are they? Because they're elderly, or disabled, or whatever. And actually, they're costing us even more money in pension contributions and unemployment benefit and disability living allowance. And actually, from the economic point of view, it's unquestionably better that we abolish the NHS and let people die off at roughly the rate nature decides. I say roughly the rate nature decides because actually I'm pretty sure that orthodox market economics probably furnishes us with a really good argument for killing off some of these blood-sucking parasites early. Who's with me? A bit of a cheer here. Little worrying. Maybe I'd better explain what was happening there. I don't actually think any of that. That's satire. If you're not sure what's being satirised, it might be you. So as I said, I became fascinated with trying to crowdsource the value of an imaginary object, something that can't possibly be bought. And in order to do that, I put an advert up on eBay. I should say that just underneath the screen grab here in the item description, I'd written, as used in the films Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Wayne's World. What will someone pay for an air guitar? Ergo, what is an air guitar worth? Well, for 3 days, actually nothing. But then on the third day, I got a message via eBay asking a question about my item. It says, "Is this really the air guitar?" From Bill and Ted and Wayne's World. So I replied, saying that not only is this the air guitar from Bill and Ted and Wayne's World, both films, but that if you just hold it slightly differently, it's also the air guitar from The Breakfast Club. I don't even know if there is an air guitar in The Breakfast Club. Nevertheless, about 20 minutes after posting my reply to this message, I got my first bid on eBay. 99p. It's not a lot, but that is now what an air guitar is worth. About 3 days before the auction was due to end, there was a little flurry of activity on this account. During the course of a single day, actually in the course of about 8.5 hours, I received 14 separate bids for an air guitar, for the right to mime an imaginary musical instrument, a right which is surely universal. It's probably enshrined in the UN Convention. At the end of that day, the air guitar was suddenly worth £34. On the day the auction was due to end, it took off. And during the course of that one final day, I received 136 separate bids for an air guitar. Presumably, I realised subsequently, this was presumably a competition between people wondering what the hell I was going to send them, people just having a bit of a laugh, and actual idiots. I'm pretty sure that the latter category were in the ascendancy on this day. And the reason I think that is that the air guitar ended the auction selling for £894. Here are some of the actual guitars you can buy for less than this imaginary one cost. And the great thing about these guitars is they're guitars. With the money I made from selling this, I bought this laptop. It's real, you can touch it if you want, not a plant. And flushed with success, I was on my way, first of all, to making a piece of theatre. Initially about value, but actually now maybe it was going to be about the folly of humanity or something. And I decided to put another advert up on eBay. I also sold, among many other things, I also sold your good name, the space between your ears, and the slow, inexorable passage of time. All of this made-up shit, and many, many other things, I should say, many things, but all of this made-up shit combined sold for a grand total of just over £6,000. More than enough to make a piece of theatre happen. I bought a slide projector, I bought this screen, a table, a lot of milk, a nice new shirt. And it was actually at this point in this process that I started to think a little more seriously about what I was learning through doing this. And what I found myself thinking was this. You see, I've always been of the opinion that a civilized society supports its artists. and that if the arts have to go cap in hand to already rich and powerful people, then the chances of the arts asking the kind of questions of those people that I think very much ought to be asked, well, the chance of that is hugely diminished. But what I found myself thinking as a result of this is maybe I was wrong. Maybe you can make money for theatre by fleecing idiots. Or for the NHS, for that matter. So why fund anything except by the market? If a theatre or a hospital can't pay its own way, then why should my 17 pence or my £3.50 bail it out? I made that money fair and square by screwing over fools and weaklings. Why should a civilised society support its artists? Or anyone else who can't support themselves? I've got loads of money. I'm all right. Fuck them. Let them hang. Capitalism is fantastic. That was yours. 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 I'm not going to drink anymore. Give us a minute. You've stood to attention. Wait, your time will come. There's actually an empty seat at the front if you want to. I'm sure it wouldn't disturb anyone. Oh, this is a quiet bit. I'll wait for. It's a bit of extra drama. Build up. Is that all right? It's all right. Now, obviously that whole story about selling made-up items on eBay in order to fund this piece of theatre is itself a made-up story. Some disappointment in the room. Actual possible fury here. So again, perhaps I'd better explain what it is that just happened here. You have come to the theatre and a man has made up a story. Shoot me. I didn't fund the show by selling all this stuff on eBay. I funded the show by making an application to the Grants for the Arts scheme of Arts Council England. The Arts Council paid for the show. In fact, with your 17 pence, you paid for it. Thanks. And of course, you'll get your 34 pence in goods and services. So that's fine. But you've paid £10 to watch the show this morning. You know you're not leaving with £20, don't you? You've paid twice. You bloody idiots. The real financial winners on the arts are the ones who let their 17 pence sort of dribble into the pot. But don't waste any unnecessary money actually watching this shit. What could possibly be edifying about sitting there listening to me telling lies about my newfound love for the marketplace? Well, I don't know the answer to that, actually. But I think, because there's a bit of tension been created there, and I think it would be appropriate for me to admit to the one other thing that I made up in order to have a theatrical effect this morning. And then we can make a fresh start. So, the story about the co-op pin pad at the beginning. Sorry. I'll tell you why I made that up. Two reasons, really. Firstly, I actually bought the milk from Sainsbury's. It's closer. And also, the co-op pay farmers 11 pence less for their milk than it costs the farmers to produce it, whereas Sainsbury's pay their farmers a living wage. So I didn't want to buy it from the co-op, but I did want to tell that story because I wanted to appear to go off script at the beginning of the show. I wanted to appear spontaneous. in order to generate a rapport with you, my audience. And I feel like until I admitted to being a pathological liar, that rapport was working quite nicely. I thought we were getting along very well, but I want you to know that it's based on a lie. It's fraudulent rapport. This isn't a real smile. It's acting. But is a smile worth more because it's genuine? Or is it worth more because it might have cost me a little something to produce it, because I went to some effort? How much more? In milk. What would you give me for genuine rapport? In money. What would you give me for a new best friend? Not an imaginary one, a real one. In milk. What would you give me to stop belabouring the point with rhetorical questions? All right, for possibly the only time this morning, I will get to some sort of point. And I'll say that we don't measure these things in milk or money because they can't be measured any more than... well, I don't suppose there's anyone here who wants a third of a pint of milk because you can gather everyone's milk together, fill 9/17 of Lake Windermere with it, and then buy just over half of an underperforming footballer. I think you want a third of a pint of milk because it's delicious and nutritious and good for your teeth and bones. And I don't suppose anyone comes to a performance lecture on the subject of value in order to aggregate the performer's facts and stories and sell them on at a profit on eBay. You come to a performance lecture on the subject of value because... You come to a performance lecture on the subject of value because... While we let that question hang awkwardly in the air, this might be a good moment for everyone to have their milk. So what's going to happen now is I'm going to press a couple more buttons on the laptop. There'll be some music for us to listen to. There'll be some more slides to look at, all milk-themed. And everyone can come up and get their glass of milk. I don't want anything in return. Well, a smile or a thank you would be nice. But I don't want anything in return. And we'll have what will, in effect, be a very short interval. Or a very long lull.
Put your big toe in the milk of humanity.
You can just lean over if you want. Come and get it. Enjoy. Thank you. Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome, enjoy. I'm a bit behind schedule. There you are. Oh, behind schedule. This is disastrous. There you are. Enjoy. There's more if you want more. Are you looking for a top-up?
No, I'm returning my pen.
Oh, right.
Thank you.
That's all right. Didn't want some, then you thought you did.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fine. So at the beginning of the show, I gave you a kind of warning that that the show might be quite hard work. That there'd be lots of numbers involved, lots of counting. That you'd have to raise your game in front of the people of the world on the internet. Actually, I thought the first half was quite fun.
Yeah.
I thought it was quite frothy, like a nice latte. The second half isn't like that. The second half is more like a cup of lukewarm vomit. Don't worry, I'm not going to hand it round in glasses at the end. No, in the first half, I was pouring all of these glasses of milk, and there were all of these pictures to look at. It was generally not highly visually stimulating, but relatively so it was. Because in the second half, I'm going to sit in this chair, and I'm going to tell one story quite slowly. And I thought I'd prepare a slide to illustrate the difference between the two halves of the show. So I hope that's clear. At the end of the first half, there was that awkward question hanging in the air. What possible value could you extract from being present at a performance lecture on that subject? And I have to say, I still don't know the answer to that question. That's something for you to figure out for yourselves, especially if you're any of the professional theatre critics in today's audience. But what I do know is that whatever value you could have had from this show, you've had it. And the second half is essentially pure self-indulgence on my part. And in order to illustrate that point, what's going to happen now is I'm going to go over there and I'm going to put on a jumper while you watch. The self-indulgence of which is going to be heightened by the fact that I'm being filmed by two cameras. And I've got to take it extra slow because I'm wearing a microphone. The reason for the jumper is that the second half of the show contains quite a bit of material that I personally find a little difficult and upsetting. And I find it helps my process as a performer if I'm really hot and uncomfortable. Jess, could I have the sombre lighting state, please? This obsession with value really started about 18 months ago. I was on a train from London, where I currently live, to Middlesbrough, where I'm from, on my way to a family funeral. And on the train I was talking to the guy opposite me at the table, a really nice guy. He had a picture of Garfield on his t-shirt. And what we were talking about was what I should do with the £20 note I'd just found underneath my seat. He thought I should buy us both beers. I thought I might give it to charity. And as we were talking, a woman came walking down the aisle of the train, carrying committing, actually, that cardinal sin of contemporary train travel. She was carrying 4 cups of coffee, not in a paper bag, which, for those of you not familiar with the practice, they'll tell you on the train that it's in direct contravention of about 14 separate health and safety directives. And the reason for that is that as you're walking with your coffee, the train might jolt, and you might fall over, and your coffee might go all over the floor and your shoes and some of the possessions of your fellow passengers, which is what happened.
Yeah.
And so as you do, I thought, I got down from my seat and I helped her to clear up. And I took the £20 note and I bought 4 replacement cups of coffee and some biscuits and things, just to sort of cheer everyone up. And after about 5 minutes, this guy, Garfield, opposite me, leaned in and he said, "Can I ask? Do you mind if I ask?" He said, "Why did you help that woman out with her coffee and stuff just then? Are you a communist or something?" And I thought, how upsetting that a simple act of kindness only makes sense to some people as part of the campaigning wing of some sort of extremist lunatic fringe. The sort of thing that only real radicals would even consider. And so I said to him, well, and it's not even as if he was particularly awkward or unpleasant. He had a picture of Garfield on his t-shirt. And I said, "Do you not think that we should just perform small acts of kindness for one another, if we can, especially if it doesn't really cost us anything?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know, mate. You didn't get anything out of it. To be honest, I think it just makes you look a bit weird." So it was feeling a bit weird that I arrived at my aunt's funeral. And I was one of the pallbearers. I helped to carry the coffin down the aisle. And after the funeral, I was talking to my cousin, her son, and he admitted to being in a bit of financial trouble. So I said, "Well, I've had quite a few good months' work. Why don't I help you out?" And he said, "Oh, do you know what, Daniel? Thank you. You're such a nice bloke," he said. "It seems strange that you could be such a nice bloke and yet not a believer." "Why is that?" "Well," he said, "you've got all of these good qualities. You're kind, generous, supportive." I'm just repeating what he said. "Kind, generous, supportive, physically strong, sexually magnetic." He went on for some time. No, he said, "It seems strange that you could possess all of these good qualities, and yet, because you're not a believer, you'll take them to hell." So in the space of about 6 hours, I've gone from being what I thought of as a fairly normal, if perhaps slightly above averagely helpful member of society, to being a godless political deviant. Now, I probably qualify as a godless political deviant, but nevertheless, I couldn't accept that any act of kindness has to come with some sort of price tag attached. Some kind of label declaring which particular ideological shop it was bought from, on behalf of which creed this act was purchased. And I thought I'd try a few experiments in kindness with no price tag attached. So the first thing I did was, later that morning, I went into Cafe Nero in the centre of Middlesbrough. And instead of buying myself a cup of coffee, I bought a cup of coffee for the woman behind me in the queue. And I said to her, "I don't want anything in return. A smile or a thank you would be nice, but I don't want anything in return. But why don't you think about somehow passing this act on, doing something for someone else in turn?" And she smiled. And she said thank you. But what her body language really said was, "You're a dangerous escaped psychopath." Nevertheless, she bought a cup of coffee for the man behind her in the queue. And he bought a cup of coffee for the man behind him. And he bought a cup of coffee for the man behind him. And he said to the man behind him, "We all have to buy a cup of coffee for the person behind us in the queue." You know, quite forcefully. And the man behind him said, "Well, why is that?" And he said, "Oh, I don't know. I think there must be something wrong with the till." 4 links of the chain to go from a small act of kindness, no price tag attached, to an administrative error. I left the shop. I got on a bus from the centre of town to Acklam, the area of Middlesbrough where my mum lives. And on the bus, I bought myself a ticket. I also bought a day rider for the man behind me in the queue. Quite a big man, tattoos, shaven head, and I noticed he had the word hate tattooed across one set of knuckles. And as he took the ticket from me, I noticed he had hate tattooed across the others. And he took the ticket from me surprisingly gingerly for a man as physically intimidating as this. And then he looked around. I think for the hidden cameras. And he said, "What's this?" "Well, it's a bus ticket." "What's it for?" "Well, you can ride a smile or a paseo." And he crumpled up the bus ticket. And he bought himself a bus ticket while holding a crumpled up bus ticket. He took a seat downstairs on the bus. I went upstairs. But as I disappeared up the stairs, he shouted after me, "I'm all right, me mate. I pay my own way." So I was losing a bit of enthusiasm for this experiment by now. But I thought I'd try one last grand gesture. I got off the bus at Acklam shops and I took out some money. I bought some envelopes and I left 5 £20 notes in 5 envelopes scattered around Acklam shops with this message. It says, "Please use this to give a gift to someone you've never met. Text me on 07789 884 162, my actual number, to tell me what it was." Just take a second to think about what you might do if you found this message, this £20 note. What would your small act of kindness be? What would you try to pass on? The reason I ask you to do that is that I'm pretty sure, given a little time, everyone could. Yeah, I left these messages round about early afternoon. And by the time I went to bed at the end of that evening, I'd received 1 reply. Is it impossible to perform a simple act of kindness? Must any attempt at generosity be met with this kind of ribald, homophobic speculation? 100 quid this had cost me. 100 quid plus the cost of the envelopes, which for 20 was £1.11, so that's £100, 27 3/4 pence, and what have I got in return? This shit! Well, I've had enough. And you lot sitting there with your free milk, giggling. Oh, you finished it. Oh, I've had enough. Oh! Oh, for crying out loud! The next morning, I went back into Cafe Nero, and the man in front of me in the queue bought me a cup of coffee. It turned out that the chain had gone unbroken for 14 hours. And that the man who'd been at the end of the chain the previous evening had returned first thing in the morning to ensure that the chain went unbroken. And I said to the guy in front of me, "This is incredible. Maybe you can pass something on." And it was at that point that he turned to hand me my coffee, and I recognised him by the picture of Garfield on his t-shirt. I know, it's almost unbelievable. And he said, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, you know, about kindness and all that shit. And actually," he said, "this is incredible." He said, "I've been back 3 times. He said, "I'm completely wired." And he said, "I've had a brilliant idea." And he told me about his plan to set up a free milk bar in the centre of Middlesbrough, handing out free glasses of milk, about 1/3 of a pint, to anyone who wanted one, asking nothing in return except maybe a smile or a thank you. And I said, "What a beautiful idea. It's completely economically unworkable." And he said, "Of course it is. But how about we try and adopt a sort of naive and reckless optimism as a deliberate political choice? Maybe you can pass an act on. Maybe people will respond in kind. And anyway," he said, "I do have some start-up capital. I've got 80 quid here that I found in 4 envelopes lying around in Athens shops." So we set up the milk bar, and people came, and people smiled, and people said thank you. Some people said, "Can I take 2?" And some people said, "That's never 1/3 of a pint." And people kept bringing us food. Someone wrote Joe a poem. And on the second day it was starting to rain, and we thought about beginning to pack up, when a man came towards us from across the street carrying a pair of umbrellas, introduced himself as Dave, said he worked on the umbrella stand in Burton's Menswear across the street, and he'd heard about what we were doing, and he thought it was fantastic, and would we like these 2 umbrellas? So we carried on through the rain, and people kept smiling through the rain, and people kept saying thank you through the rain, and people kept bringing us food. Someone wrote Joe a novella. And on the 3rd day we were nearly out of milk, and we were actually already reminiscing, a little nostalgic about everything that had happened over the last couple of days, when a man came towards us from across the street leading a cow. Introduced himself as Giles. Said he was a farmer. Said he'd heard about what we were doing from his nephew Dave, who worked on the umbrella stand in Burton's Menswear across the street. And he thought it was fantastic. And would we like this cow? So we were completely self-sufficient. We had as much milk as Daisy could squirt. And the day after that, someone gave us an empty shop unit. And the day after that, people started bringing us furniture. And people kept coming. And people kept smiling. And people kept bringing us food. Someone wrote Joe a 4-volume history of the British Isles. And word of the milk bar spread like a free cup of coffee in an exponentially proliferating queue. Until we were quite a community. We didn't all need to be out the front handing out the milk, so some of us were always out back as a kind of quite an artistic community. There was a milk sculptor, a milk painter. I made a whole series of one-man shows using milk as the central metaphor for everything in human existence. I know it sounds far-fetched. Until a man came towards us from across the street, carrying a clipboard, introduced himself as Walter, said he worked on the Health and Safety Executive of Middlesbrough Borough Council, said he'd heard about what we were doing, and he didn't think it was fantastic. Said it was in direct contravention of about 14 different health and safety directives. Said he couldn't possibly let an operation of this size continue in premises this small. Said it was more than his job's worth. And he said, do you know what? I'm not actually sure that half of you even exist. I'm pretty sure that half of you are in fact characters in a story invented by him, he pointed at me, in order to make some sort of cheap political point. What could I say to him? That's as maybe. But surely you'll let me get to the end of the story. There's only a couple of paragraphs left. And he said, I cannot possibly let an operation of this size continue in premises this small. But you might have noticed that the cash economy in Middlesbrough isn't performing that well at the moment. There are quite a lot of other empty shop units around. Why don't I give you the rest of the street? So we spread out. And the bigger we got, the more people came across to us from the cash economy. And the more that happened, the more shops would close down. And every time a shop closed down, we moved in. Until the cash economy in Middlesbrough had completely collapsed, replaced with our gift-based utopia. You've probably heard about it. Something like that couldn't happen without making it into the papers. Even if it did happen in the northeast. And no one knew how it happened, but the River Tees was clean. And flowers sprang up everywhere. And wherever you went, you could hear music, even if there didn't seem to be anyone around. And if you listened very carefully, especially on a quiet day in peaceful parts of town like Farndale or Bluebell Beck, you could just hear whispering. And no one knew if it was the wind or the trees. Maybe it was just nature itself. But if you leaned in and listened very carefully, you could just hear it. Thank you. Thank you. Now, because of the eBay story I told earlier, one or two of you might be wondering whether or not this story is actually true. Cynics. I'm going to answer that with two other questions before finishing this afternoon. The first of them is, isn't it interesting how much easier it is to believe that people are idiots than that they might just be reasonably nice to one another on a consistent basis across a protracted period of time? The second thing is I guess not so much whether or not this is true, you'll have to decide that for yourselves, but whether or not it would be nice if it were true, whether or not it would be nice to adopt naive and reckless optimism as a deliberate political choice. Earlier on, I asked you all what you would do if you found that £20 note in that envelope. Now, I think I've made it clear already that I'm not going to give you all 20 quid. But I do have here one envelope with one £20 note in it, and this message. Please use this to give a gift to someone you've never met. Text me on 07789 884 162, my actual number, ladies, to tell me what it was. I'm going to give this to someone in the front row. I'm going to ask you to give it to the kindest looking member of the audience once I've gone. Anyone volunteering is automatically disqualified. And I'd like you to send me your story. I'm collecting these on my website. You can click through the Price of Everything page and find them there. I'm horribly behind schedule with them at the moment, but I'm going to put some more up tomorrow. Just because you don't get the envelope doesn't mean that you can't do this and send me a story as well. I'm going to leave my number up at the end. Please put it in your phone, and in a year's time you'll see Daniel By, and you'll think, who the hell's that? And then you'll think, oh, it's the guy with the milk. And that will be your reminder to send me a story. And here, brilliantly, for one night only, or one morning only, I have an example of that. Yesterday, I got a text message from a member of the audience, a professional masseur, saying, inspired by this making generous offers to people, I'd like to offer you a free massage. And I said it maybe wouldn't be quite in the spirit of things for me to keep it myself. So I'm going to give this to one of you as well. There is a code for a free massage in here. You've got to use it in Edinburgh. It is an Edinburgh-based masseur. But is there anyone who's got a bad back or bad shoulders, or... Because otherwise I will use it myself. One of the cameramen sticking his hand up there. Well, I mean, that wouldn't be totally crazy. I'm going to leave this here. Claim it if you want it before you leave. If you don't, I'll make the same offer to tomorrow's audience. How about that? But please, someone take it. Because otherwise I'll just use it myself. It wouldn't be quite the same. And please send me stories. All that remains for me to say is I've been Daniel By. This has been The Price of Everything. And you, ladies and gentlemen, have been great value. Thank you very much.